All right, good evening and welcome to the New York JavaSIG first session of the year. Oh, yeah, first session of the year, 2025. Very happy to be here. We have two great presenters, also my friends, colleague, Jeanne and Victor. Thank you all for coming. I know it's cold night in New York, so appreciate everybody coming. Who's first time here? First time? Nobody's first time? Good, good. Or not so good. Bring your colleagues, right? It's also nice to have new faces and see and renew our gang. Out of curiosity, which version of Java are you using? Anyone using 21? 21? Production. 17? I'm not head shaking. I'm starting to get concerned. 11? Oh, okay, all right. Less than 11? No? Okay, good. 11. But 11, how years old? 11?
9.
9? 8 to 9 years, yeah. All right, so what are you waiting for? Come on. Approval, it says. That's true. All right, something we would like to say, you want to say about Dev Nexus? Frank, I can give you here the mic to say about Dev Nexus before we continue.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Dev Nexus is a Java conference, is one of the major Java conferences in the US, along with JavaOne, and it's coming up the first week of March. We're given a 40% discount to the conference. So I emailed that, there's a link that I emailed to you. So that's pretty fantastic that the guys down in Atlanta gave us that discount. So please use it. We're all going to be down there, so it'd be nice to see everybody from New York down there. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Frank. All right, at the end of the presentation, we also be referencing JetBrains license. So if you use any of the JetBrains license products, it can be, hopefully, Java, right, IntelliJ, but it's also valid for any other tool from the JetBrains. It's a 1-year license. We also gonna raffle one of the books, right? So this book, both of the authors here wrote this book, Real World Java. So after you learn the language, right? We know that it's only part of the job to learn the language, also learn the syntax. Have a lot of new things that you need to deal with, right? JDBC, logging, you need to learn Spring and many other things. So this book has everything that you need. Again, wrote by my colleagues and presenters today, Jeanne and Victor. I'm also the reviewer, along with Barry, right? Thanks, Barry. Great book, great book. Let's go for today's presentation. So Jeanne, Java champion, senior member on CodeRanch. She helped me prepare for my very first presentation. Very nice, very appreciated for that. She works in a financial company in New York for many, many years. Victor, also Java champion, my colleague. Not mentioning names, my colleague, and that's it. He also participated in the JSR that wrote collections, no, concurrency, right? Participated on the concurrency, InfoQ editor. So we'll let them present now, talking about logging for Java. Thank you very much. Stage yours. Have yours.
I was going to thank Barry and Rodrigo for editing my book. I don't know if that's stolen their thunder or not, but thank you both for editing the book. Super appreciated. It will be great to see as more people read it what they think of the job we did as writers and as editors. So let's get started. This presentation has 4 sections. We're going to start out with distributing some basics on logging, and I'm going to compare the logging framework and give you a brief intro to Log4j. It's free, and then Victor is going to get into the more interesting part. So buy your book. You might have noticed on the first slide that it said March Dev Nexus. We are presenting this at Dev Nexus. That's what it was written for. You're getting an advanced preview of it. slides will be on speakerdeck.com/Boyarsky after it is presented at Dev Nexus. You get to see it first. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Victor to give us an intro.
You've got
Wherever
it.
you
You're
go,
holding. No.
Oh.
Oh, here.
If anybody has the idea to write a book, I have to warn you in advance. It's really hard. It probably wouldn't happen. I mean, Jeanne is so organized about it, and Barry and Rodrigo did amazing editing and reviewing. So
Victor thought of it when you listed it.
yeah. So logging. You remember when you wrote your first Java program? It was probably something like this. System out print line, hello world. Right? So system out with print line is a great way to generate logs when you're learning Java. But for real world Java enterprise development, we need something more robust. First, we need to be able to control how much is logged in each environment. While you may want to output values of some local variable when troubleshooting, details like that would only really clutter up the logs, right? Especially if your application has many users, you don't want to have all of your diagnostics logging in a production environment. So you really can't control something like that with system out print line. Also in production environments, you might have requirements to redirect logs based on certain retention policies. You might have audit logs that need to go to one place, right, to be retained for a certain amount of time. You might have error logs that you want to analyze, so those will go somewhere else. And you really can't do anything like that with system out print line. Also, modern applications are microservices based generally. So where these applications are composed of different services, they're basically different applications running on different machines. How do you coordinate all of that? Also, with system out print line, how do you search your logs, right? So that's something that we really need to be able to do, especially in a coordinated environment where we want to be able to trace different messages that compose one request. How do you trace through all of that in one location? Also, there's a lot of hidden metrics in your logs, right? How many times was this service called, or who's calling what? So there's no real way to aggregate metrics from logs using system out print line, and that's something that the logging framework give you. Also, performance-wise, sometimes composing a log message takes time, right? You might have to pull up some information. It definitely is a performance impact. You want to be able to log asynchronously, or you want to be able to compose messages. Let's say you don't want to log certain messages in certain environments. Why go to the trouble of composing a log message that's never even going to display? So we have the concept of lazy logging in the frameworks. Also, we want to keep our file systems trim, right? We don't want to keep logs that are just old and taking up a lot of space. So we want to be able to specify a a log rotation policy. So we want to be able to configure that.
You have a microphone?
I do. Am I too low?
Is it blinking green or is it just green? Just green. Okay.
Am I okay?
I guess.
Okay, so enter logging frameworks. Logging frameworks allow you to configure very granular controls about which messages get logged, where they get logged to, how often to rotate them. You can rotate them based on log size or frequency. You could say once the log gets to a certain size, the file gets to a certain size, roll it over, start a new log. Or every day at 12 p.m., rotate your logs. It lets you identify all your services associated with a single call. So you could have like a common trace ID that goes along all your log messages. So even though they're running on different servers, you can have all your logs coordinated by searching for a specific trace ID.
The common frameworks all perform similar functions, albeit in their own specific ways, but they share the same basic concepts. So we'll talk a little bit about what the basic concepts are. One of the benefits of logging frameworks is that it lets you control what and how much to log in each environment. So you can specify based on environment what you're logging. When you're developing locally, you want to have, maybe you want to be able to specify specific variables to a diagnostic to see what the values of variables are. You don't need that in a production environment. So you want to be able to specify a logging level. And all of the logging frameworks have the concept of a logger. So what is a logger? A logger is the basic unit of logging. It's the components that's used for creating these log messages. Every logger has a name. That name might be displayed in the logs. You can use it for filtering. You don't have to display it, but you could. And then again, everything has the concept of a logging level. And we'll see more about that. How to log your messages based on a specific level, and how you can turn off specific levels in specific environments. If you don't specify a logging level, there's a concept of inheriting loggers. So it's like in Java, you have an object and everything inherits from object. In logging, you have a root level and everything inherits from root until you override it. So let's talk about the logger. The logger is a class that's used to send messages to the log. And depending on the logging framework you're using, there are different factory methods that are used to obtain a logger. Every logger gets a name. And the name can be displayed in the logs, as I said, and it can be used to filter log messages. You can declare a logger for every class, and it's only accessed in that class. So you can make it private.
If you request the same logger name in different classes, you're still going to get the same instance. So you can make it final within that class. And the popular loggers are thread safe, so you can make it static. It can be used shared across different classes. Generally, you're going to name your logger according to the class or the package, but that's not a requirement. You can pretty much name it anything you want. The logger name can be configured to display in the log. And although you usually want to do that, right? You want to say where this log message originated, you don't have to do that. It's configurable. Once you have a logger, you can use it to log your messages at any severity level. So for example, you can have logger debug, which will log at the debug level, or you could say info. Each of the frameworks has a different word to use for these, but these are the common ones: debug, info, warn, error, and there are different semantics that are kind of used by convention to decide which of these log levels to log at. The semantics are like a trace is a very detailed debugging. You can even have all log messages, or you could say trace log messages for very detailed debugging. You can have debug levels, so that would be something that you wouldn't deploy to production, but you'd display locally debug messages. And that captures information that you would need to diagnose the issues during development, right? But not necessarily in a production environment. Info is probably used more often in production environments. That's used to log general operational information. It gives you insights into application flow without being overwhelming. And it's often the default level that's used in production. Warn it's not an error, but it's something that you want to highlight a deprecated API or something like that, something that's a warning, but it's not necessarily going to blow up your application. Error represents a severe error that may cause the application to terminate. And that's essential for diagnosing critical issues in production. And then fatal is errors that can cause the application to terminate. Those are usually like catastrophic failures that are going to bring down your application. Okay, after you decide on the log levels for each message, the next thing you want to consider is how to set the minimum logging level to display in each environment. So that's done by setting a property called the root level, right? That's the object in logging. And that's the base level that's going to display. So in this application, we're setting it to warn. So that means that anything below warn, right, info or debug, by default will not display. Then you can override the specific loggers based on the package and the class name, based on the logger name. So in this case, I'm saying the root level is warn, which means nothing will get displayed below the warn level, except if it's in the package con.wiley.realworldjava, which in which case it will display an info. That's the package we've been using for our book. And then if you don't have a specific logging level written for your application, for your the specific log level message, it will inherit. Or you can override based by providing a more granular, like in this case, we're saying util is debug. So this real world Java will display at info unless it's in the util package, in which case it will display at the debug level. I just wanted to also mention that if you're using Spring, you can add these logging levels into your application.properties or your application profile.properties, right, for your specific active profile, or you can include a logging.properties file if you're not using Spring, and that will contain the information for each of your environments. Okay, and I'm going to hand off to the spectacular Jeanne Boyarsky to finish.
All right, we're going to compare the most popular core logging frameworks. The first one, well, not particularly popular, is Util. Java Util Logging comes in Java. The other, and I want to say JavaOne 4, you don't need to use any libraries to get it for free. So it's useful in that you don't have to do anything to get it, and you don't have more jars. It's less useful because it's less powerful than the other logging. So we're still going to start with it. Good question.
Does anyone actually use that?
I was about to ask that. Does anyone in this room use Java Util Logging in real life? Yeah, that's what I expected. I used it once, but I was writing a logging library, so I needed to test through all of them. That feels like cheating. But it's still good for seeing the concepts, and we're still going to go through it, and then we're going to get to the ones that people actually use, and I'm going to do that same survey for each one, so we'll see which one is the most popular. Be that as it may, it's still useful to understand the limits of Java Util Logging. So if someone has the right idea to use it, you could be like, "So I think we shouldn't do this." Oh, okay. All right, this is your basic code using Java Util Logging. It has the logger that Victor described, and it's just like all the logging frameworks. It takes a string to say what logger. It's super common to use the class you're in so that you don't have a compile time dependency. So you have a compile time dependency, and it represents the class that you're actually in. Like when you name something, represents it. Logging, super easy. You've got severe warning and info depending on your logging level. Okay, cool. That's pretty big. Less basic is lazy logging. All the logging frameworks now allow you to pass in a lambda instead of a string. You can still pass in a string, but passing in a lambda allows it to be more performant. There is a caveat with this stuff. If all you're doing is passing in a string, lazy logging doesn't buy you anything. Compilers are super smart. They're going to be fine. It's when you're doing some big complex operation, like, oh, well, if I'm logging, I want to calculate a bunch of things and then the average of something, and I'm going to go on the network to get the data, and then I'm going to log it. That's an expensive operation. What's annoying, though, is a lot of static analysis tools like Sonar will be like, ooh, I see you have a logger. You should use lazy logging here. Like, well, not so much, right? So a lot of the time you'll be marking those as a false positive because you don't want to make your code harder to read by using an unnecessary lambda. You want to know that it exists for the cases where it actually makes sense to use lazy logging. This is what a logging config file looks like in Java Util Logging. Super simple. I can do .level, which is my root level. Unless I've specified otherwise, I want to log at the info level. I can then specify other loggers. So I've created one using the package name Victor showed and saying, well, for that package, I want it to be severe. And for one package down, I want it to be warning because I figured I would make this hard to read and difficult. And I am going to use the console handler so it logs it to the same place system out print line logs it to. All these concepts applies to all 4 loggers. How you express it varies by logger. Now, it's not terribly useful if you're logging to the console. You could have done that with println. What's much more common is to log to a file. You can do that with Java Util Logging, just like any other framework. We're choosing a different handler this time. We're using the file handler to say that we want to log to a file. And then the rest of this is configuring that file handler with what we want. So where do we want the logs to be written to? What format do we want to do? Do we want to use log rotation? How large do we want this file to get before we rotate it? Even what is the format? So you can specify everything there is to specify about your log in the log file. Great. But it's not that useful in the real world because it's fairly limited. So our next survey question, who uses Log4j at work? About half the room. See if the other half uses a different framework later or if they didn't vote. Till then, you'll have to stay in suspense. Log4j is one of the oldest logging frameworks. A lot of people have been using it, keep using it. A lot of people started. There's a lot of documentation, and it's way more powerful than the built-in Java Util Logging. You need to have at least 2 jars in order to use Log4j. There's the core, there's the API. You need that in order to make calls. And then there's the core, which contains the logging implementation, which seems kind of important if you have a logging framework. Then there's a variety of other optional libraries, and if you use them, it changes the behavior. Those are meant for advanced things, like if you want to log to a database or a message queue or an email or anything other than pretty much a file or the console, you would add files to it. But for the most part, 2 libraries, maybe 3 libraries, you've got Log4j. And then you get to update Log4j forever. It's great fun. Our logging example looks fairly similar to the other logging example, tiny bit shorter, a little faster to get the logger. I can call log manager get logger without having to specify where I am, which is kind of nice. But overall, this looks pretty much the same as the other example did. Where it gets more interesting is that I have choices. Log4j has the concept of a regular basic logger, but it also has the concept of a formatted logger. And you can see the difference here in how you specify things that you're logging. With the default logger, you use squigglies in order to say that a parameter goes here, and then you pass the values. And this works, but we're Java developers, and we know how to do parameterization, right? It looks a lot like the second one, because that's what I would use if I was doing a normal string formatter. It gives me all the power of a normal string formatter, which means I can format my decimal values however I like, and it's going to look like normal Java code. Personally, I like the second one better, but they both do work, and you can choose whichever one that you want when you're writing your code. Knowing they exist is good, and having a team convention is super important. It's really annoying if every class you open has a different logging format. That invites you to use the wrong one when you're trying to log and get gibberish. After all, think about what would happen if you passed the first one to a formatted logger. Probably not what you had in mind. Now we have our Log4j configuration. Here we have the concept of an appender. My appender is named console, and then at the bottom of the file, I configure my appender to say what it is. It's a console logger, it's going to standard out, and I'm just doing a simple message format, but I can specify anything I want for fields. I also have a root logger where I say that I'm going to use error as my logging level. And I have another logger that I've named with the package we're using, allbook, and saying in that package, I want to be more detailed, I want to go info. Now, what gets interesting is this logger.book.additivity equal false. It's an odd thing to put in the logging file, isn't it? What that does is prevent me from getting the same logging twice. If I don't do that, when I log in the Wiley real world Java package, the root logger will be like, error, yep, I'm going to log this standard out, cool. And the logger book is like, oh yeah, I'm going to log that too. I'm also going to log it to standard out. I don't want it twice. I want it once. And setting the additivity to false tells the logger that if it's already happened, don't do it again. You know, it's been logged, covered, you're good. Log4j allows you to specify your log configuration in multiple formats. Here we have an XML format in order to show how to configure a file logger, the rolling file in this case, so that we don't have the old ones around forever. I find the property file to be easier to read, but I've seen both of them in practice, and there's not a right or wrong here. It really is your team convention, but again, be consistent from application to application so people don't go nuts. Finally, I can configure using a YAML file. I'm back to my console logger because I didn't have a lot of room on screen with YAML. It's kind of verbose. But I can say I've never seen anyone actually use the YAML logger, although the internet swears that people do. I don't know any of those people. They probably don't live in New York, but maybe they exist. Also, if you're using the YAML formatter, you often need extra libraries, so that's fine. But choices. How many of you were programming Java in 2021? So we all have a traumatic memory that's on the screen right now. Yeah, nervous laughter there. What was interesting about this is that there were 4 security findings in the space of 2 weeks against this library. It's also super important that you're on Log4j 2.17.2 or higher so that your info security people don't invite you to revisit this again. There are later versions, and of course, it's good to be on the latest. But from a security point of view, 2.17.2 or higher. A few of the slides in this presentation have a background that looks like this, the gray background. So this one and some tables. All of those are taken verbatim from the book. It's great when you can plagiarize yourself. And it's also great because you can show off some of the content in the book. Our next logging framework is Simple Logging Facade for Java, who uses SLF4j as their logging framework. Looks like the other half of the room. Okay. This is a common API, so it's easy to switch between actual loggers. So I'm going to ask that same question again for those of you who just voted. Are you using the SLF4j simple behind the hood? I'm guessing nobody, but I'm going to ask to be thorough. Okay, that is not a powerful logging framework. It's for people who I guess want to be purists and use just SLF4j. Who uses Log4j under the hood? Okay, yeah. And who uses Logback under the hood? Okay, and I had one person who didn't vote. So just busy, or is there another thing that people use?
Can't remember.
Which proves that SLF4j is working because you don't have to think about it. Testimonial from Morrison. And you can use anything. Those are the common logging frameworks, but you can use super obscure logging framework that you've written yourself and plug it into SLF4j, and then no one will ever have to think about it again because they'll be using the common APIs. Got to get better at using animations here. All right, so code looks exactly the same as what we were just looking at. Nice and easy to use. The difference here is that I am not able to use string format as a built-in thing. I actually have to call string format, which is so not a big deal. I can also call that formatted if I want to call it on string, but by default, we only get the squigglies. Okay, Logback. Logback uses the same API as SLF4j. It even has the same founder as SLF4j, which is a really cool fact that I learned while writing this book. We've got the Logback core jar for logging, and then we've got Logback Classic if you want to do anything advanced. The code literally looks the same as what we just looked at because it doesn't have its own API. It uses the SLF4j API. You can configure it. This is our rolling appender. It has a good number of policies. I really like the size and time rolling policy because it lets you configure in multiple dimensions in a very small self-contained space. So that's pretty cool. And now we're back to stuff from the book. The most important thing with logging frameworks isn't the one you choose. It's knowing what code is equivalent and that you can do things in whichever logging framework you want. So Java Util Logging has the longest list of logging frameworks of them all, which is funny because people don't use it. Log4j is the second largest, and Logback and SLF4j have the same list because, of course, they have the same API. But they all have the same concepts here. Output locations vary. They all support the console, and they all support files, of course. Java Util Logging supports exactly 4. The other guys support many, many, many more to the point where I wasn't going to write them down. But any place you could possibly want to log to, your logging framework allows you to log. And then output formats. Java Util Logging, again, there's only 2. Logback has a small variety, although, again, you can extend things. And Log4j has every format known to man. Some of these seem less than useful. Like YAML doesn't seem like a great output format to me. Input, sure. Output is like, I kind of want it to be a little more concise. But CSV is common, text is common, lots of choices there. Finally, the vocabulary varies. Java Util Logging, despite being the newest of these libraries, uses its own vocabulary, because reasons. So just being aware that handler and appender are the same and formatter and layout are the same helps save you a bunch of time when talking to people, especially new people. Our last topic before I turn it back over to Victor is Log4j3. Some of you may have heard about Log4j3. It is the successor to Log4j2. Kinda. Log4j1 is dead. It died 10 years ago. If anyone is still using it, they should talk to their employer about why they're using super, super, super obsolete software that is so obsolete they don't even report security findings on it anymore. Log4j2 came out in 2014. It is not being sunsetted. It will exist in parallel with Log4j3 for a long time, and I'll show you why soon. And Log4j3 is coming out this year, I think. Okay, so when is Log4j3 coming out? It was doing really well. It was under active development in June of 2023. Alpha 1 came out in December of 2023. Beta 1 came out. Great trajectory. You had an alpha, you had a beta, you're ready to release, and then this happened. February 2024, we had beta 2. That's not so much after beta 1. Fine. Then nothing happened for the better part of the year. And in November, surprise, Log4j beta 3 came out. Okay, and now what? Well, nothing. They seem to be waiting for consensus, but looking for at the mailing list, I'm not sure exactly what we're waiting for. So it just appears to be a volunteer shortage. There was a legit reason for what went on in 2024, though. Log4j3 is interesting because it doesn't have its own API. It uses the Log4j2 API. And you'll see what I mean in a moment about uses it. But that meant they had to wait for Log4j2.24 to be released, which it was. And now we're waiting to have more time pass. But don't worry, because you don't want to upgrade to it right away anyway. So introducing Log4j3. This is the same API as Log4j2. Exactly. If you were a user, it looks exactly the same. If you were a library designer, it does not look exactly the same. So it's not just backward compatible, it is the same version. Log4j3 is only an implementation, not an API. This sounds like it's going to confuse the pants off people, doesn't it? But now you know, and you can unconfuse everyone else. When you use the BOM, you pull in Log4j BOM, whatever version of Log4j3 you want, and it pulls in the Log4j2 API for you. That's great. So you get the dependencies as I promised. So why would anyone use Log4j3? Well, it uses modules. That seems compelling if you use modules. I don't know anyone who uses modules in real life. Anybody? Oh, I know someone who uses modules in real life. Today is the day this changed. Sorry, but you're super unpopular with that position. If you are using modules, Log4j3 is awesome because it's now provided as a legit module. The core artifact is small. They've cleaned out a lot of the CRUD from Log4j2 that doesn't need to be there or is unused. So the jar is smaller. If you're in an environment where you pay for bandwidth or memory, that's useful. A lot of these less common functionality is in separate jars or gone. They got rid of the deprecated code. They got rid of the obsolete code. For example, the old version of Jetty that hasn't been supported in years, can't use it with Log4j3. They did not get rid of anything that you might use or care about, though, so you're safe there. They also updated the dependency structure. Log4j2 had this thing where you put an optional dependency on your class path and it changed the behavior. That's gone. If you want to use something, you still need a dependency, but it's a more legit dependency. And then it comes with a third-party library, so you don't need to go finding that, and they can't get out of sync, which is useful. So developer experience is good. The next thing that changed-ish is the properties. The documentation says that you can use a new property format, which is clearer and easier to read and is more consistent with the future. However, I tried it and it didn't work. I also went through their documentation and used the example that is in the repository, and I tried it and it didn't work. I'm starting to see why it might still be in beta. So I recommend not upgrading until other people have upgraded and all this has gotten straightened out. For people who are writing tools, they got rid of the Log4j2 properties. There were a lot of those for library providers, so that's relevant that people can start upgrading, but everything's backward compatible. They can do it at their leisure. And I bet in 5 years, everyone is still using the Log4j names, because if you're not forced to upgrade, who would do that? All right, now that I've taught you not to use Log4j, that's your takeaway. Don't use modules, don't use Log4j, except the one guy who's using modules. You should use modules because they're important to your employer. Let's learn about distributed logging and see what else there is to know. Victor?
So nowadays, I think we've matured to the point where most healthy enterprise applications of any consequence are composed of microservices. Microservices, of course, are deployed. They're individual applications. They're deployed on clusters of servers, and they're used in coordination with each other to
a request. That all sounds well and good until things break. Then how do you find the perp? So that's the challenge. Also, our logs contain valuable metrics. How active was each service? How many errors were logged? What were the most common execution paths? So how do you, and also how do you coordinate all of the log messages across the service, right? You make a call, that service 1 goes to service 2, calls service 3. You have one request. How do you coordinate all of the composed services that are used to produce that request? So there are technologies like micrometer or micrometer tracing and its predecessor Spring Cloud Sleuth that apply common trace ID across all of your log messages. So service 1 will, when you make a request, a trace ID will be assigned. Now that request calls another service. That trace ID will be preserved in the header of the message. It'll go to the next request, into the next service, and that same trace ID will be kept across all your log messages. Now you have a distributed log that's running in one place that's logging all of your log messages. So you can do a trace on that specific trace ID to figure out where things went wrong. There are 3 very popular distributed logging platforms. We'll discuss there are many, but we'll discuss these 3, which are the most popular. So Elasticsearch is arguably the most popular distributed logging framework nowadays. It's part of the ELK stack, which is an acronym for Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. We'll talk about what those are. There's also Splunk, which is the oldest of the surviving logging frameworks, and it still enjoys a really large and growing user base, and it still has frequent releases. And Loki is a relative newcomer. It lets you extract labels. It doesn't really do full log searching, but it's close enough because it lets you extract labels or tags from your logs that you can filter on. And the popularity of it is based on the fact that it integrates with Grafana, which is a really popular graphing tool. And also it uses PromQL, which is the Prometheus query language. So if you have a shop that uses Grafana and Prometheus, Loki is really good for integrating with those. So let's talk a little bit about Elasticsearch. And so as I said, it's affectionately known as the ELK stack. ELK stands for Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, and those are the main components. And the Elasticsearch part is the core of the Elastic stack. It's the primary logging engine, the Elasticsearch, and it can store and search large volumes of logging data. And it exposes RESTful APIs for searching or for creating your log messages. Logstash is the L in ELK. It lets you build robust pipelines for ETL, extract, transform, and load. And it loads pipeline. It lets you create pipelines for Elasticsearch and other platforms as well. The K is for Kibana. Kibana is the Elasticsearch visualization and dashboarding tool. There's really more to it. There's the whole Beats, all the Beats plugins. So you have File Beat, Metric Beat, Packet Beat, Audit Beat. These are all things for pulling up files, pulling up metrics, various metrics from your applications. Packet Beats sends network data to your logs. Audit Beat sends audit data like system security logs. There's many more Beats as well. Next is Splunk. So Splunk, as I said, is the oldest of the distributed logging technologies that are still around. It provides advanced logging, log searching and visualization. It lets you easily search and filter your log messages. So you see the way it is here. You can specify a search string over here, and then you filter, and that will filter all your log messages based on the search strings. It's pretty powerful. I find it to be a little bit sluggish, but it is a great way for keeping all your logs in one place. And then finally, Loki. Loki, as I said, doesn't provide full search capabilities, but generally that's not a showstopper, right? Because the log collectors that you use to produce the Loki logs can extract important labels that you can filter on. And but the killer feature is that integration that I described with Grafana and Prometheus. So you can take these dashboards, and if you see a certain, let's say you see a spike in your metrics, you can mouse over that spike, and you'll be able to see the logging messages that are associated with that spike. So it helps you really get to the problem very quickly. And that's about it on my side. I will now hand the mic back to my awesome co-author.
Okay. So our biggest learning is that we need to make this presentation longer. But before we get into the book giveaway, what questions do people have about logging?
How do you feel about the Java platform logging?
You don't mean Java Util Logging, right? You mean the actual logging. It's okay. I don't need it that often, but it does what I need. Victor, do you have anything to add to that?
That's what I would say.
Yeah. How about you? Wait, there's another person with him.
Could you elaborate on why we need the SLF4j? Because it's just the API. So Log4j also has the APIs. We could directly use it.
Yeah, you absolutely can. The benefit is the standard API, and if you want to switch languages, you have language. If you want to switch frameworks, you have the option to, because you're not tied specifically to the API of a certain library. But it also helps when people are coming from a different place that they're more likely to have encountered your API syntax if you're using SLF4j, regardless of what is under the hood. So it saves time. I was a little surprised that it was split 50-50 in the room between Log4j Direct and SLF4j plus anything. I would have expected SLF4j to be higher. And I'm kind of curious if that's the scenario we see at Dev Nexus as well, because I think a lot of us work for financial institutions or long tenured established companies. And I'm curious, in an environment where that's not the case, like if someone was starting from scratch, maybe they would be more likely to choose SLF4j and the percentage might be different. So that's a poll that I will be running each time I give this presentation and see how that answer changes. If I was starting from scratch, I would choose SLF4j. And I'm going to do that as a survey now. If you were at a new company that had no Java logging framework, what would you use? Who would use Java Util Logging? Yeah, I know we're all sitting by our hands. Who would use Log4j? Who would use SLF4j? And who would use Logback? Right. Yeah. Someone said about using the default, which for Spring is SLF4j and Logback. So the hands did agree with that speculation I had, that a lot of it is what we were using Log4j, and we're still using Log4j. And I think that makes sense. Like, who's going to go to their boss and be like, I know what we should do. We should change the logging framework we're using all our code. I can't even say that without laughing. It's like, that's definitely a prepared to be laughed at thing. So, no one will ever change. It's all we can do to upgrade this thing often enough, let alone switch to a new library.
We took SLF4j and Log4j and we use that. We're always using the same version anyway. The same
oh, no. If you're using Log4j, you have upgraded. Remember the slide of trauma?
We did upgrade, but of course, it's always Log4j and SLF4j.
Yeah.
It's never like I'm not using anything else ever.
Right.
I might move it to Splunk, like pipe it to Splunk, but still, it's Log4j and SLF4j.
Right. And I think that's why people are still using Log4j alone, because that's what they were using. Splunk is different though, because it's not inside of your application.
So I could like pipe it out, but I still use that combination always somehow.
Okay.
I never saw any benefit to that. Not that there are like so many choices that I'm going to change it in a couple of years. Never.
Yeah. But you absolutely do upgrade versions, because we know what happens if you don't upgrade versions. It's sad. Anybody else? Frank?
So I've been using Java for a long time. One problem we've had a long time is the format of the output. Because I know we had this problem with the JVM had outputs, and looking at GCs, based on what tool you're using,
Right.
one would break, one would work, then would change something, the reverse happened. So are there any best practices to formatting your output? Because now we have AI, we have predictive AI can look at
Right.
these tools and give us ideas what's happening. Are there any best practices or frameworks around that?
Well, there's the best practices that have existed since the dawn of time, like make sure you're including the right fields, when, where, how, why, make sure you're not including sensitive data. For AI specifically, has anyone heard anything? Yeah, I would ask too, but that's not going to work because Frank asked. But we have someone with a hand up who's not Frank, so maybe he has an opinion.
Lacks some automation, and then because a lot of stuff should be done like literally like low level coding, I would say. But I mean, why? How come? So yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to maybe to delegate something to AI tool. I don't know which one.
I could see giving the logs to the AI tool and asking it to help find problems. Like I could see that being useful, whether I knew what the problem was or even just potential problems and see what happened.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's language pattern recognition. It should be great at that.
Exactly. I mean, just recently, so I have Comcast and I track my internet speeds through a little program that I wrote, and it generated data, and I fed all that data to a generative AI and asked for patterns and what happens, and the graphs it drew and the insights it gave me, I was shocked how good it was. But that's because I wrote the program for me. I knew what the format of the data was. But in an enterprise, you have different teams working. I mean, how do you get everyone to use the same formats? And to me, that's harder than actually picking the framework, right?
I agree. Oh, sorry. You don't have a mic.
XML file, and that
Yeah.
contains, and that contains so you could share it across all your
Yeah.
applications.
So I guess the rule of thumb is make sure you're sharing
sharing
the
it.
information.
It's like anything.
Yeah.
So for those of you who saw me scribbling down before, this is the world premiere of this talk. And since it's short, some of your questions have inspired what will be in the next version of this talk, which will take a lot less time than Log4j free in order to come.
One more thing, if we could cover more of the lazy aspect.
What else would you cover? I mean, you call Lambda, it's lazy logging. Like, what else is there to say? Yeah.
I think the old way we used to do is like if, want,
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
Oh, you're saying like show the old way and why it's unnecessary. Got it. Yeah, sure. Show old lazy logging with if statement. That's a good point because somebody could see the old way and be like, what is this? And it's definitely in a lot of existing code.
You'd be surprised how many people still don't use Lambda.
Yeah. Because when you were saying show lazy logging, I was like, it's a Lambda. I showed it. I don't know what else there is to say, but comparing it to the old way, I think is valuable. Okay. Any other comments or questions or thoughts?
You could talk about the platform logging system because it came out in JDK 9, and it's like Log4j, where it's like a facade, but it has no dependencies. So
Okay, I think the next version of this talk is going to have to credit the NYJavaSIG. But thank you all. This was super, super helpful. And also, I accidentally demoed that you can have a talk here that's not super refined and engage the community, and that's really helpful. So thank you all. Any other comments or questions? All right, so the next thing we're going to do is do our 2 giveaways. These giveaways are completely independent of each other. Regardless of whether I can get off Zoom, right, Carrie?
Yeah, we're shutting. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Zoom. Regardless of whether you get an IntelliJ license, you were equally eligible to win the book. So let's start with who wants an IntelliJ license, because I know a lot of you are regulars and have one. 1, 2, 3. That is perfect. So the 3 of you win. I don't have to do a raffle. Email us at info@javasig.com.